Baci, and hello everybody, and welcome to the International Youth Conference Session 6. My name is Clarissa Cavacci, and I'll be your host for the 6th session of IYC on asset-based community development, joining you from my hotel room in Lake George and Ali in Lake George, and we have Ian from Connecticut. I'm the co-founder and chair of the Montage Initiative Student Advisory Board. Montage Initiative is a nonprofit organization in consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. We work to empower women and communities economically and build peace through women. I'm also here as part of the Climate Reality Corps. The Climate Reality Project, founded by former US President Al Gore in 2011, is a nonprofit organization involved in education and advocacy related to climate change. The Climate Reality Corps is made up of activists, cultural leaders, organizers, scientists, and storytellers committed to building a sustainable future. So during the session, as always, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, ask questions at any time for our speakers, and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. And feel free to make any comments and engage in the discussion. To introduce this session's topic, as parts of the world reopen from the pandemic, and while many countries continue to face multiple waves of COVID-19, the climate crisis is still as urgent as ever. Increasing extreme weather and unsustainable energy and consumption patterns precipitate natural disasters, man-made conflicts, and insecurity throughout the world. In a cycle of inequality, the poor and most marginalized communities suffer the consequences the most. And so this session will focus on asset-based community development for environmental sustainability as a way to combat the climate crisis. Asset-based community development, also known as ABCD, considers local assets and resources as the main building blocks and vehicle for community development. It emphasizes building upon the skills of local residents and the power of local associations and institutions to develop and make positive change. To present our agenda today, give you an idea of where we're going, we will kick off the session with Al Gore's famous Truth in 10 presentation on the reality of climate science. And this will be followed by a workshop-style demonstration on asset-based community development by IYC co-founder Ali Mustafa. Then we will bring to our session activist Ian McDonald to showcase an example of community action and advocacy at work to stop the building of a harmful power plant in his community in Killingly, Connecticut in the US. We're going to finish up with a Q&A session with you, our global audience. So first, to set the tone for the session, we're going to show you Al Gore's Truth in 10 presentation on the stark and dire climate crisis. In 2006, Nobel laureate and former US Vice President Al Gore got the world talking about climate change with the Academy Award-winning film An Inconvenient Truth. So in just 10 minutes, this presentation of slides from the 2017 edition will take us through the greatest environmental challenges, prospects for addressing them, and what we can do about them. So without further ado, let's view the video.
Us all, and we all have the power to help solve it. I'm standing here on my family's farm in Carthage, Tennessee, where I first learned as a young kid from my parents.
Seems like the video volume might not be working. Would we be able to restart part of the video so we can hear the volume?
12,000 climate leaders to carry this message around the world. And now it's your chance to join the movement. Please be a part of.
Okay, so it seems we're experiencing some technical difficulties with the volume of the video. We're going to try for a little bit longer. Yeah.
And it changed the way humanity thought about our common home. And in the decades since, we have been trying to solve the climate crisis. By now, there are only 3 questions remaining. Must we change? Can we change? and will we change? So let's take them one by one. First of all, must we change? The science community all around the world has been telling us for a long time we have to, yes, and now Mother Nature is telling us, but let's take a look at why. The sky is not a vast and limitless expanse the way it appears viscerally. It's a very thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet. And we're putting into that thin space 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution every 24 hours. The way it works, most people know, is that the energy from the sun comes in the form of light, and it warms up the planet, and then that heat energy is re-radiated back into space, and some of it is caught by the natural greenhouse gas layer, and that's a good thing. But we're making that layer much thicker, so more of the outgoing infrared is being trapped, and that's what is driving the temperatures up. And there are many causes of man-made global warming pollution. Agriculture is a part of it, and the management of forests and transportation. But the main part of it is the burning of fossil fuels, which provides more than 80% of all the energy the world uses. And it's been going up, particularly since World War II and in recent decades. As a result, all this heat's being trapped, and the air temperature is going up quite dramatically. And this is causing record-breaking years. 16 of the 17 hottest years ever measured with instruments have been since 2001, and the hottest of all was last year. And of course, heat itself is a problem in many parts of the world, many parts of this country. But on a global basis, more than 90% of all this extra heat energy is going into the oceans, and they're heating up pretty rapidly. And this makes the ocean-based storms like hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones stronger and more destructive. And it also disrupts the water cycle because the water vapor coming off the oceans is increasing very significantly as the oceans warm. And that's carried over the land and falls in much bigger precipitation events, both rain and snow. So we get these record downpours, and that leads to record flooding. And it's been happening all over the world. Every night on the TV news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation now. And the same extra heat that's disrupting the water cycle and making the downpours bigger is sucking the moisture out of the soil and making the droughts deeper and longer and more destructive. And when the land dries out, the vegetation dries out, and that means when the temperature goes up, fires increase. Now we have these mega fires. This was a city of 100,000 people in Canada destroyed by fire last year and evacuated. The climate-related extreme weather events worldwide, according to the insurance industry, have been steadily going up. Now, same heat is also melting the ice in Antarctica and here in Greenland. This is a huge glacier in the last century and completely melted now, and NASA has precisely measured the decline in the mass of ice on Greenland and Antarctica. And all that extra melting is raising sea level. This was in Miami, Florida, a little over a year ago, sunny day, no rain involved, but it's a high tide. Miami's the #1 city at risk in terms of assets at risk, along with Guangzhou, China, New York, and Newark, and these others. If you look at cities at risk by population, a lot of giant cities in developing countries are very much at risk. In fact, the Department of Defense in the U.S. has long warned about refugee crises connected to the climate crisis and pandemic diseases and water shortages and food shortages. Where food is concerned, the extra heat stress is now beginning to decrease crop yields from rice and corn and soybeans, and this is beginning to be a serious problem. It's also a medical emergency because the relationship between humanity and the bacteria and viruses has always been affected by climate. And with temperatures going up and the climate being disrupted, we're seeing tropical diseases spreading poleward. Of course, the transportation revolution and air travel has a lot to do with this, but the places where diseases like Zika take root, that changes with the climate. We never had problems with Zika. I never heard of Zika when I was growing up. It's a serious threat, and the main mosquito that spreads it is now covering a wider range in a warmer, wetter world. And the virus incubates faster, and in the warmer temperatures, it bites more. So the doctors are very concerned about this. And of course, the biologists are also concerned about the extinction threat. Up to half of all the land-based species with which we share this planet are in danger of extinction, according to the biologists, in this century, unless we make changes. So all of these threats, including some like ocean acidification that we haven't even covered here, help to answer the question, should we change? And for those worried about the economy most of all, it's the number one threat to the global economy, according to the World Economic Forum. So do we have to change? Yes, we do. But what about the second question? Can we change? If we have to change and we can't, that's a formula for anxiety and depression. But fortunately, the answer to this question is very, very exciting and positive. We've got the solutions available to us now. Look, for example, at renewable energy. Wind energy was predicted to give us 30 gigawatts by 2010. Actually, we've exceeded that prediction by 16 times over. There's an exponential curve with wind power being used all over the world now. It's really quite dramatic, and it could supply 40 times as much electricity as the entire world uses. And where solar energy is concerned, it's an even more dramatic story. The predictions 15 years ago were we'd have 1 gigawatt per year. When 2010 arrived, we exceeded that goal 17 times over. And last year, we exceeded 75 times over. This is really taking off like a skyrocket, an exponential curve, like computer chips and mobile phones and flat screen TVs. It's very exciting because the cost is coming down so rapidly. In some regions, it's now less than half the cost of electricity from burning coal. In many countries where there's no electricity grid, we're seeing solar panels on the roofs of grass huts. And in a developing country with great policy, Chile, they have seen a slow, steady growth, but this is working. Look at what's under construction and approved for construction in Chile now. This is incredibly exciting. And there are many regions in the world that are poised for this kind of breakout. 13.5 gigawatts. This is incredible. So every hour, the Earth gets as much energy from the sun to supply all of the energy the entire global economy uses for an entire year. That's really dramatic. So if we increase the fraction of that we can harvest and use, we're really going to make a lot of progress. Batteries are beginning to spread quickly throughout the marketplace. LEDs are predicted in 8 years to virtually take over the market, 95% of all light bulbs. All these automobile manufacturers are now offering or preparing to offer electric vehicles. This is another part of the sustainability revolution. So, can we change? Yes. But what about that final question? Will we change? Well, here too, there's exciting news. A year ago, December, at the Paris negotiations, virtually every nation in the entire world agreed to phase down greenhouse gas pollution to net zero emissions as early in the second half of this century as possible. And we're seeing marches.
So I don't know if Ian and Ali are still with us, or if you can hear the video. Okay, great. Great. Wonderful. So thank you to Climate Reality and Al Gore for this intense, speedy crash course on climate science and our interconnected systems. As you can see, the presentation was from 2017. Since then, the extreme weather effects have only heightened, and we've had record-breaking heat, global pandemic, and much more. So this is becoming more and more urgent. This presentation, you can see why it forms the backdrop for the rest of the session discussion. And now, before we move on to the next portion of our program, I'd like to just acknowledge you, our audience here. We love seeing your comments, your feedback, where you're from. You're answering some questions as well as asking them. So we have delegates joining us from Bangladesh, from Zambia, Nepal. So good representation from Africa and South Asia. I saw Egypt in here, Nigeria. So quite a few countries. So keep engaging with us. And now, to show us next steps on how we can work together in our communities to combat this climate crisis that we just heard so much about the detailed statistics, and to ensure sustainable development, it's my honor to introduce, obviously, a man who doesn't need an introduction, IYC co-founder Ali Mustafa. Ali is also the co-chair of the Civil Society Youth Representative Steering Committee at the United Nations. Ali's going to take us through what asset-based community development is and methods to identify strengths and resources in your community and mobilize them for green and sustainable growth. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. And video indeed that we watched was eye-opening, very important, and Mr. Vice President really put together a good piece of information and eye-opening thing. Moving forward with this stuff, with the session, I have a presentation that I will be showing. So I'm just trying to put the presentation on. While I'll be doing the presentation, I will put other speakers on the background of the studio. So it's just the presentation. We are just trying to load the presentation. Having some technical difficulty loading the presentation. It should be fine. I'll share a screen. So the presentation is about the asset-based community development, and it is the concept that has not been practiced much and not been known much by the people.
Yes, thank you everybody for hanging in there as we pull up the presentation. By the way, we're going to share some links with you and some information as the session goes on.
So I just wanted to know if we start the presentation. Before we start the presentation, I just want to know if people knows what community development is, and if they know what community development is, I really want them to comment in the comment section and let us know what they think about it, so we can move in the right direction and know and try to understand what you think about community development. What is your understanding?
So to answer that question, feel free to just type in the chat or like a word that comes to mind when you think community development.
The presentation is there, as we can see. So, okay, so the presentation is here. So the community, as someone is commenting that the community is to empower the group of people. I'm seeing different comments saying community development is a process where people come together, take action. Absolutely. As you can see on the screen, the community, a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, the condition or the condition of sharing or having certain attitude or interest in common. So for example, we are over here in the room right now in Lake George, and we have people with us around here, like our team members. So we are community. How we are community, how we are becoming a community. Number one, that we are sharing a common space. That is a main requirement. We are sharing a same space, we are in the same room, and most importantly, we are sharing the same interest. We are here to do International Youth Conference, and we believe in sustainable development goals. So sharing a space, one thing, a physical space, and number two, a common goal, that makes us a community. So as you can see, the definition of a community is right on the screen. You can see a community is a small or large social unit who have something in common, such norms, religion, values, or identity, often, but not always. Communities share a sense of a place that is situated in a given geographical area. So it sums up exactly of what I was trying to explain you. Before I move to the second slide, can someone tell me what development is? People, I want them to comment if they know what development is, what they understand from the word development. When you hear the word development, what do you see? What comes in your mind? Positive growth, yes. Upgradation, yes. Improving the quality of life, absolutely. So development, change for better. Someone says that development means positive growth. Exactly. So development, basically, you can define in 3 words, in 3 sentences. Number one, change for the better, as people are mentioning that. Development, growing and enhancing in something. Yes. And number two, you have to change from an undesirable situation to a desired condition. Undesirable situation can be anything. Like we don't send some places we don't have water right now, we don't have good internet. That's an undesired situation, and having a good internet would be a desirable situation, a development. Just give an example, not trying to do something else. Requires number three, requires interventions for change to happen. Interventions, that is the most important thing. So about the intervention, we're gonna talk about more. So types of intervention. This is something really important that you all need to focus on. What are the interventions that are needed that are needed for development, that are needed from going from undesired situation to a desired situation, and what are those interventions that lead us towards development? It can be any sort of development, as you can read. It says awareness raising, enhance or improve of existing knowledge and skills. You need to have, first of all, you need to have a first-hand knowledge of the problem that exists in your community or with yourself in your city, in your area, and then you need to know more. So enhance your skills and knowledge, know more about the problem, do more research about the problem. So knowing the problem is, for me, knowing the problem is half solving the problem. Advocacy. We're going to talk more about advocacy later in the session. We have a great speaker to talk about it. Advocacy is really important. So people, who do not know exactly what advocacy is. Advocacy is that needs to engage. Advocacy engages the individuals, like, and groups and institutions. They can be anything. They can be a government, civil society, student organization, youth organization, and advocacy is always done outside your community, not within your community. You do the advocacy, you go out of your community, you go to the institutions, organizations, government, NGOs, civil society organizations, and tell them about your problem. You advocate about your problem. And association. So these are like 4 A's: awareness, advocacy, and then the allocation of resources. Allocation of resources is something really important, that is the base of this presentation that I'm presenting. Allocation of resources, the greater access and ownership and control over resources, available resources. Here we are talking about the available resources that you have in your community. They can be anything that are required to solve the problem, no matter how small, how big they are. So you need to have the complete control of the resources. People who are asking for the attendance link will be shared shortly and will close as soon as this sessions end. So be patient, and attendance link will be there. Don't worry about the attendance. Focus on the content. What do you see? The glass over here. The glass seems half empty, half full. I know there are so many examples of half empty glass and half full glass. What do you see? People will say, oh, we see half empty. People will say, oh, no, we see half full. It's all about the perspective. So this is what it is. Half glass, you can see, we can, say that it is the community that have deficiencies. Like every community have problems. These are deficiencies that the community have. And the full glass is the community that have the assets, that have the resources, and that have the capacity. So all the communities, they have both. They have deficiencies, and then they have resources. They have capacities. And with the help of the half full glass, you can, rebuild your glass. So moving forward, fast forward to the presentation, asset and resource mapping exercise. So this is really important. I will not go much deeper into this, because this is a big exercise, requires a lot of time and required us to be in person to do this exercise. But if you go online and you just look for asset and resource mapping exercise, it is really easy. I'm going to explain more about how you can, not more, but very little about how you can, use this map to identify the resources in your community and identify the problems in your community. So the purpose of this mapping system is basically to know two things: that you have the resources, what are your resources, where are your resources lie, and how you can mobilize those resources and identify those resources. So this map is the community need map. You can see that it's over there. You go online, you will find the map. You just write the asset-based community development map, and it will be there for you. So I will be focusing more on the asset map. Over here, I'm going to talk 2 more minutes on the asset mapping, because for me, it's more important to know what is asset mapping. In the larger box, you can see that we have divided communities into 3 different sections. One is the local institutions, then there are community associations, and the gift of individuals. So these are your assets. Local institutions can be the business organization in your community or in your city. It can be any business. Then a school, colleges, universities. This is your asset in your community. Still counts under local institution. Then local council. Then you can see the hospital and government agencies. So this thing you see in the box, the bigger box, the first box, is the first and the biggest layer of your resource that you have. So when you do the mapping, you will write like, okay, in my community, what are my businesses. You write down the businesses, you identify what schools you have, you will identify what local councils you have and how you can reach them. Then you come to the second layer of the mapping. You will see the community associations, like, small clubs, or religious organizations, or sporting teams, and these are, like, the second layer of the resource that you have that may help you in development. And the third and the most important layer is the individuals of the community. For me, these are the most important people, most important resource any community can have. As you can see in the last box, they can be the young people like you, uh, senior citizens, artists in your community, all residents, and labeled people like more famous people or celebrity type of people in your community. So these are all the resources. Later I'm gonna share the we can share this slide with you, and you can download it. We are going to share the slide with you. So community assets, you can read here in the points in easier words. Talent and skills of the residents, association and networks, institutions, physical assets like buildings, equipments, etc. Economic assets like local business, um, like how much is your consumer spending in your community is. These are the assets that you need to know what are the strongest pillar of your community. So this mapping tool will really help you identify the available resources you have. And so this is one of the important thing that I always use this, how you map the skills of individuals. You need to do this exercise whenever you are forming an organization or a community group. You need to do the mapping of individuals that you already have in your community or in your team. So using this thing, you can see how the person is useful or utilizable for your organization or for your cause. You need to know his skill information. The person is skill in what areas, what is person's experience in community, and what is the his what are his dreams and his personal information and all. As you can see, it's there written. So this slide sums up the this slide says definitely it sums up the entire presentation that I've given. Community asset mapping process, how you're going to do it. It's just a revision of what we are talking about since last 15 minutes. Plan the process, conduct the mapping exercise, and use the information. This slide will be shared with you all for more to understand the process and how you can do it. If you don't understand the mapping or mapping process, you can definitely reach us out, email me, or write us on the Facebook page, and we'll definitely going to help you with the mapping process. Thank you, Clarissa.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ali, for that excellent overview of asset-based community development and asset mapping, and pinpointing key stakeholders to carry forward the will of community members, especially, as you mentioned, using the resources of individuals. That is the greatest resource we do have. That means all of you, our audience members as well. So as a reminder, please feel free to pose any questions for our speakers and any topics that may come up at any time. We're collecting them for the final Q&A piece of the session. So next, to provide us with concrete examples of how he is using these tenets of asset-based community development to solve environmental problems, we have with us activist Ian McDonald, a resident of Killingly, which is a rural town in northeastern Connecticut. Ian has studied in Finland, lived in the US states of Tennessee and Vermont, and attended Bard College. Working as a stonemason since age 22, Ian is also here as an activist. Since 2016, Ian and his colleagues at Killingly, Connecticut, continue to fight the construction of a second power plant in the town of Killingly. Ian works with the local group No More Dirty Power in Killingly, as well as with Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization, which brings environmentalists and environmental groups from around the state together to fight climate change. We're going to be sharing some links and resources that Ian has provided for us about the context of the case that Ian will be talking about. So Ian, many of our audience members face their own environmental issues in their own communities. And so we invite you to please share your experience with community mobilization, advocacy, successes and challenges in the case of Killingly, Connecticut in the US. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Clarissa, and thank you, Ali. I think that's a very useful framework that you just provided for us, and probably would have been a helpful approach for us at the beginning as well. But so I live in Killingly, Connecticut, and it's in New England region, and there's a proposal to build a 650 megawatt fracked gas power plant, which would be the biggest new power plant in our region, and the second in our town as well. So I'll try to give a sense of just what it feels like when this kind of project comes to your town, your village and your region, and how we responded to it. Just give a sense of that. Hopefully there's some lessons there. I'll try to be as accurate as possible, but I am coming at this from the perspective of a local resident activist, not a academic or NGO. But the first thing I'll say is that if you're in the process of fighting fossil fuel expansion or another similar type of project, one of the best things you can do early on is to keep good records of everything that you're fighting, everything you're learning, because throughout this whole process, I found myself constantly trying to refer back. What was this thing we said? When were we fighting this? What was that thing? And if you can have some kind of, as a community, working together to kind of aggregate this in a sort of a searchable form, seems like a minor point, but it is very helpful. I found, anyways. So I became aware of this new power plant back in 2016. There was an informational meeting that was happening, and I was concerned about it, both for climate reasons and also because for health reasons. It's the second power plant in our town, in the same village where my sons are going to be going to attending school. We have the highest asthma rate in the state already, and so there were considerable health concerns around this as well. So at the beginning of this informational meeting, the town manager was very solicitous. Like, let's welcome our guests. We must be kind to them. We must be very, make sure we're not rude to them at all. And I guess the first lesson I learned right off the bat was, very often, whenever there's a fossil fuel project, one of the first things a company will do is do their best to co-opt local officials. So be on the lookout for that. And now sometimes that's corruption. Sometimes it's just, in our case, it could just be that we're a lower income community and there was some revenue, sort of similar to tax revenue, that would be generated. So very often in lower income communities, officials will be kind of thirsty for any kind of revenue, even if it's at the cost of the health of the local residents. So, during this informational meeting, and I just say this, this was supposed to inform the local residents, and it kind of went on, and sort of there was a big table of corporate lawyers who kind of mumbled for about 2 hours, and then we finally fought to get a couple of questions in at the end, and I think this is a technique that gets used as well, where when a power plant, or sometimes regulators will use this as well, where they kind of make residents feel as though we're the experts here. Don't ask too many questions. We know what's going on. Just be quiet. This is over your head, and maybe try to bore you to death. So that is something to be kind of on the out for. But don't be deterred, because in listening to this, I heard one of the lawyers was indicating that by building a second power plant, the air would be cleaner in our town. I'm like, how is this? How does the air become cleaner when you're building a second large power plant? And basically what it boiled down to is they were measuring the air halfway across the state next to another power plant that had come offline that environmentalists had fought for that had nothing to do with this power plant. So just because people are projecting that they're experts and, you know, listen carefully, don't be deterred. That's, I guess, my second thing. So the next significant event we had was we have something called a siting council locally, which helps determines what projects get built. And there was an event for them to come listen to local residents. And there we had a great turnout from local residents, but we also had, I believe the company kind of contacted and promoted that this one particular, particularly the Boilermakers Union, which was a group of people who tend to work on boilers and power plants and that type of thing. They came out in full force and kind of read off a script. And basically they were, they wanted this plant built because this is the kind of work they do. And so I just say that to say that another piece of this is that the people that are, I do think we need to advocate for the people displaced in the course of a change in technology, like the change from fossil fuel and fracked gas technology to a cleaner environment. And both out of compassion and because they will very often be weaponized against the local community and in favor of the expansion of fossil fuels. But despite this, you know, we had a lot of local residents who got up, who spoke their mind, you know, about the public health concerns, about the 3 schools locally, about the elderly care facilities, the needless destruction of 63 acres and going through 14 wetlands with threatened species and damage to local farms, and as well as the very real challenges for the climate. So after that, I thought it was a very excellent showing by our local community. We all, you know, and we also submitted testimony to our state institutions, and all this went on for a while. And then in 2017, there was a decision not to approve the power plant. And so I'm kind of, and I say this with some embarrassment, but I'm kind of, you know, thinking, oh, we did a great job. We got rid of these guys. But basically, this was a, so it was defeated, but it wasn't entirely defeated. So the next thing is don't keep your eye on the ball. Just because something seems like it's dead, it might not be. It was in the papers that this was defeated and whatnot. Now, in the interim, they reapplied. And the reason that the Siting Council had not agreed to this was because they said there wasn't a regional need. And there's a different institution that kind of determines regional need and grants the actual auctions. In our case, it's called ISO. So we thought it was all the environmental concerns and our, you know, our passionate advocacy around that. But really, it was just that they said, oh, we don't need the power. Well, in the meantime, they kind of snuck in there. One power plant had come offline, and they hadn't taken on to consideration the new wind power being built, Vineyard Wind, and they were able to reapply, and ISO granted them this auction. So then the next part of the process, kind of what has happened since a little bit, is ISO granted the auction, then the Siting Council kind of citing them, saying, well, we're forced to kind of approve this now. Now, their job is to cite power plants, but they're saying this broader regional organization that purchases power agreements is forcing us to do this. And then our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is also blaming this greater regional entity. And the governor has done this as well. And so, and meanwhile, and I've spoken with the regional entity myself, they're saying, no, this is not our responsibility at all. The states have their, they're the ones who are in charge of doing this. And I say this not to confuse everybody about this whole process. It's not, the details are not so important. But what's kind of more important is that, you know, failure is an orphan, and nobody wants to take responsibility for building this power plant. Everybody is pointing to everybody else as to, it's not our responsibility. These guys made us do it. And within the mandate of many of these organizations, there really is no meaningful, much more of the energy is towards electricity generation and capacity, very little emphasis towards actually the climate impacts, and I think very poor attendance to the local impacts, as we have no local air monitors actually dealing with this. So since then, you know, in the first part of this process, I'm coming at this much more as a local resident, concerned, engaged, but many of us were, and kind of coming at it as we're following this process all through this kind of bureaucracy, giving testimony and whatnot. After this, it kind of became evident that this was all sort of, maybe not entirely for naught, but didn't really amount to much. And I think our vision of things became much more in terms of working together collectively as activists to put pressure on politicians, particularly elected leaders, and as well on these regulators to make very clear that they are responsible for climate change. And I think it's very critical that we hold everybody all along the way responsible, because everybody seems very, very keen to sort of pass it off. And so what we did, I ran for our local town council as one way to kind of help in that regard. You know, we also have been writing op-eds. We've had many, many local protests as well as larger protests at our state level. And, you know, so that's kind of, that's a big part of the process. A week or so ago, I spoke with our governor at an event that wasn't anything related to this, but I kind of was able to sneak in there and because I was engaged in another part of another kind of community activity unrelated to this. And I was able to, so sometimes if you're engaged just generally in the community as well, that can help you fight in interesting ways. So I'll just say just some final things here. You know, engage in the process, but don't, but hold people accountable often and early. Get together with your community groups often and early. And we've had great coordination among different environmental groups in the state. I think it's come a little later than we would have liked, but I think that's very important. Another thing, just a small point, be careful of the export exception in dealing with fossil fuels. What I mean by that is, in Connecticut, we're a net exporter of energy. So while our goals for the state that the governor is proposing is only to deal with the energy the state creates, which is a small state, but we export a lot. So they're basically letting themselves pollute exponentially as long as we send it out. And I know other places around the world have the same issue. So be careful of that. Another thing with gas, and I'll just say this just because it's my experience, but a lot of the sales pitch around fossil fuels and gas in particular has to do with intermittency issues with solar and wind and that type of thing. Now, solar and wind are minuscule in our power grid right now, but even so, don't be intimidated by that. There is battery technology, pumped hydro, all kinds of other technologies that can help deal with the intermittency issues. So don't be held hostage by that sales pitch. If you have,
perfect. We'll just wrap up here. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you have some kind of climate event, don't just advertise, organize, and try to get people to commit. Create your own media, because the media sadly doesn't treat climate change as an important issue. And last lesson, don't just engage abstractly in climate change, actually fight the regional fights for the expansion of fossil fuels. So thank you. I hope something there was helpful.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ian. And by the way, people will be able to watch the recording afterwards, so you guys can all have those tips. Thank you again, Ian, for sharing your story and experience, the tips, how to go about the goals that communities have achieved for sustainable development. Ian, we see your struggle and challenges in this frustrating experience. And when you have a giant, powerful, wealthy actor coming in and taking advantage of the government institutions. And just to bring this out to our audience, examples of this exist in all parts of the world. When deforestation logging companies come in Brazil and infringe on indigenous communities' homes in forests. We also have companies coming and taking over farmland in Africa. So Ian, you have touched on power dynamics, inequality, using the state processes and institutions, the importance of coordination and accountability. Now we have just about 5 minutes for question and answer. I would like to ask both of you questions. Let's begin with Ali. Ali, I'd like to ask you, what are skills that are needed to conduct asset-based community development, especially for young people? What skills do young people need to do this?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Mm-hmm. Yes. What are skills that are needed to conduct asset-based community development? What skills do young people need to go about such an exercise and coordinating with their community for asset-based community development?
So still, I'm not able to understand the question. I'm actually being ironic when I say this, because there is absolutely, you don't need any skill to, to conduct asset-based community development thing. You just need to have a problem in the community, and you need to know the problem that, and need to know, accept that their problem exists. Just like you mentioned about the power plant in your area, so you need to know that it's a problem, and you need to have a good knowledge on that. So just need to know that there is a problem and accept that there is a problem. Like there is climate change is a problem that is more dangerous than the world war. It has the capacity to kill more people than an atomic bomb can. We have seen what COVID did. It has killed people. After World War II, I think this is the most people died, and it just not killed people. It also destroyed the economy of the entire. We are still trying to recover out of all of this. So this is absolutely, I think you just need to know. You don't need a skill. The mapping gives you the skills. You just need to have the acceptance that problem exists.
Great. Thank you so much, Ali. And now this question is for Ian. Ian, you touched a little bit on this. What individual and group actions can be taken to stop a project like a power plant? You mentioned writing co-ops, protests. Anything else that you've been trying and testing?
Well, that's been a big part of, like I said, some of us even ran for office. Really, and I think Ali was getting at this, really, whatever you're going to have a diverse group of people, and they're all going to have their own kind of relationships and skill sets. So often the best thing is to draw from that as a good starting point as to where you try to find an inroad. So I think those are, those are certainly good things. Trying to, as much as you can, connect up with other regional actors who are sympathetic to your cause. That's very important as well. Do that early.
Mm-hmm. Great.
While maintaining your local kind of energies as well.
Great. I'm so glad you touched on that, because that was actually my next question. What do you see space for regional cooperation for the case of Killingley? It's a very local, small town, but you mentioned there's New England. So is there space for regional cooperation for taking advocacy and action to scale? What role can regional support and coalitions play? Are there any regional organizations that you're thinking of working with?
Yeah, I would say that we've scaled up very well to the state level. And we have reached out and had some events regionally, and I've reached out regionally. I will say, I think that is a big challenge. It's something we're working on currently. But to have many of these fights get very segmented, and when you're dealing with these big actors, it's much more easily for them to take off this little town or even this state, but if you can work regionally. So, now, many of these organizations we're working with have chapters, throughout the region. But I would say that there isn't always natural regional coordination. So in our case, we have to work to make that happen. I don't think that exists in a way that it really should just naturally. It's something that we have to.
Great. So there's definitely space there for that to grow. I do have one, it seems Ali will be back with us afterwards. I do have one other question. So this is from Ruth Brinkley, who is asking, how can incentives be created for industries to switch to clean energy practices? I'm not sure if you might have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I think a difference, context from place to place. I mean, in the United States, there's, because of the currency situation, there might be some more room than there is in other places to actually just incentivize certain forms of creation. But I would just say that one thing that we also fight against is this sense that clean energy will function as kind of a market-based mechanism. And I think a key point is to say, we need to do this for scientific, health, human reasons, environmental reasons, and to say, I don't know if this is interesting how, but I would say that clean energy deserves incentives, and as far as how, just advocate, we've just been advocating in our state for that. I don't have any specific insight, I guess, in that point, but.
For sure. Certainly. Thank you. And the last question will be for Ali. Ali, we'd like to talk a little bit about the role of inequality, especially for marginalized communities. How do you ensure in asset-based community development that the voices, especially of the poorest and more marginalized, get heard and get elevated?
I think so. The best way to do is that they have to find leadership within themselves and have to initiate it and have to make some noise, because a person is, or the community or a group is marginalized when it is suppressed and when it's not given their due representation on the table, or was not given consideration to their problems, or not given consideration to the issues. So I think this is the best thing, is that such people who are marginalized, such communities who are underrepresented, I think they need to organize themselves and have to find a leadership within themselves and take their voice up and do advocacy. That's what I've learned from my experience, my political experience, my experience working with the international organization. If you are not going to speak up for yourself, no one will, and your voice will always be secondary, no matter what you do.
Right. So we have to each create our own space at the table.
So people have to find leadership within themselves, within their communities, and make them powerful.
Great. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, I'd like to ask if Ali or Ian, you have any last 30-second takeaways for our audience before we close. Let me know.
Go, Ali. Oh, okay. I would just say that the main takeaway is that just engage consistently. You don't need to wait for anybody else to be some leader to kind of come. If there's as Ali said, if there's a problem, tackle it. Like, you probably have more strength in your community and yourself than you even know. So just be brave and get out there and engage consistently, and that could very possibly yield some good results.
Great, thank you, Ian. Ali?
My last comments will be to be open to the new ideas, be open to the acceptance, because acceptance is halfway problem solved.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ali and Ian, for your insights, your inspiration, and encouraging us all in our own battles in our communities. So as we close the session, everybody please stay tuned for the next event starting right after session 7, beginning now. That session will be on the inclusion of marginalized youth in society. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, once again, to our speakers, and see you soon at the next session.
Thank you.